In the 80s and 90s in America, it seemed like everybody wanted their MTV. The music video was brand spanking new, and MTV was the epitome of cool. But times inevitably change, and so do fads. What happened when the music stopped and reality TV took over? Let's reminisce about the days when MTV ruled the airwaves. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Intellectual Digest, the channel for all things intelligent, nostalgic, bygone, and fun. Do you want your MTV? Keep the dial turned here. It was the late 70s, and the 80s were fast approaching. As hard to believe as it is, there was really no TV specifically for young people up to that point. The airwaves were oversaturated with soap operas, talk and variety shows, reruns of classic sitcoms and old cartoons, game shows, after-school specials, cooking shows like Julia Child, and lots of commercials. The concept of what we would now refer to as the music video was in its infancy. In the 60s, the Beatles made movies like A Hard Day's Night, Help, and The Yellow Submarine with exciting scenes that showed off their new music. Fans loved those scenes, and they bought the music. The Beatles also made short promotional videos where they lip-synced and acted out their songs. By 1968, other top artists like Jimi Hendrix, The Animals, Steppenwolf, Aretha Franklin, Richie Havens, The Who, The Rascals, Paul Revere and the Raiders, Connie Francis, The Cowsills, and Ricky Nelson were also making promotional videos. These early videos were put out by the record companies to promote and sell records, and it worked. Young people in particular couldn't get enough of these mini-movies that featured their favorite songs. In the 70s, there were promotional videos and short films by rock bands like Blondie, Queen, and Elton John, and popular disco artists like ABBA, Olivia Newton-John, and the Village People. British television had a show called Top of the Pops, which introduced music fans to hot, new British groups like The Police, The Eurythmics, Rod Stewart, and Billy Idol. Top of the Pops would serve as the perfect prototype for the future MTV, and it introduced the new wave of Britpop to American audiences. Overall, the 70s were an extremely experimental time for television. In 1974, the TV landscape was changing. Satellites went up everywhere. HBO, CNN, ESPN, and the Weather Channel premiered in the late 70s, and NBC had Saturday Night Live. The new Nickelodeon network was all the rage with the little kids and tweens. What about the teenagers and college students out there? Back at the beginning of the 80s, Warner Cable unveiled Sight on Sound, a music channel that featured concert footage and other music-related content. Sight on Sound was included with Cube, which was a cable package you could get through Warner Amex. If you remember from the Nickelodeon video, Cube was interactive, and subscribers were given a remote to vote and make decisions about the programs they were watching. With Sight on Sound, viewers had the ability to vote for their favorite songs and artists. This was in 1980. They could also win prizes and interact with the DJs who played the music and videos. How totally awesome is that? Are any of you old enough to remember Cube and Sight on Sound? Tell your stories in the comments section. Intellectual Digest loves to hear from you. In 1981, a 27-year-old programming director by the name of Robert W. Pittman, who was working for WMAQ in Chicago, had a brilliant idea. Robert was a former DJ, and he'd also been the programmer at the movie channel in the 70s. Robert came up with the innovative concept of an all-music video channel, where those record company-produced videos could be played, one right after the other, like music on a radio station. Steve Casey came up with the name MTV for music television. A whole team of co-founders, creators, and producers was hired. The seeds of the music television revolution had been planted. Robert, Steve, and the team hired cutting-edge artists and design houses to create logos and animation for MTV. He wanted to make absolutely sure that the young people who tuned in to watch the new channel wouldn't be able to mistake it for any of the other networks. Robert was from the music business after all, and MTV was all about instant recognition, a unique look, and the best music. MTV had to be anti-establishment, anti-authority, and speak to anyone under the age 30. To help reach the young people, Robert and the MTV executives held a national search for video jockeys, or VJs as they were being called, to introduce the videos and other programs. There was a different VJ for each demographic. Nina Blackwood was the blonde, bombshell vixen. Mark Goodman was the everyman nice guy. Alan Hunter was the jock. J.J. Jackson was the radio business veteran. And Martha Quinn was the sweet girl next door. For those of you who remember early MTV, who was your favorite VJ? Let us know. The VJs appeared in intro and outro clips and voiceovers, as well as readings of the latest music news, interviews with popular bands and singers, and announcements of concert dates and promotional events. These segments were pre-taped during the course of the work week, even though they were made to appear live and spontaneous. But MTV wasn't a sure thing just yet, and the VJs were even told not to get too settled and to keep their other jobs. How crazy is that? They really had no idea. 1 minute after midnight, on August 1st, 1981, anyone who was up late flipping through the channels was greeted with the voice of MTV executive John Lack speaking the words, "Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll." This was over footage of the Space Shuttle launch countdown for Columbia, which had just taken place earlier that year, as well as the launch of Apollo 11 in 1969. The MTV theme song played, which was written and composed by Jonathan Elias and John Peterson. The public domain NASA footage of Neil Armstrong planting the American flag on the surface of the moon was shown, along with a beeping sound, and the flag changed to show the colorful, ever-changing MTV logo. MTV was born. Were you one of those viewers on that first day? Tell your story after the video. The very first video that was played on MTV was, appropriately, "Video Killed the Radio Star" by the Buggles, followed by "You Better Run" by Pat Benatar. The music video, as we know it, was hardly a thing, but that was all about to change, thanks to MTV and Robert W. Pittman. In those early days, the screen would occasionally get fuzzy and go black whenever the VJs would put a new VHS tape into the VCR that broadcasted the videos, but it helped give MTV its alternative image. When a video was played, the bottom of the screen showed information about the artist, the song, and the record label. Nobody was running from MTV. MTV really struggled at first, because very few artists and bands were making music videos. There wasn't a whole lot of programming to choose from, and so MTV repeated all of its inventory over and over again in those first few months. As if that weren't bad enough, the VJs who ran the videos talked for a long period of time between the videos. They talked about the music, and even though it was supposed to be wild and unscripted, it got boring fast and definitely not fun. On top of that, the production quality was terrible, and you have to remember that cable TV was a luxury back then that very few people actually had. It seemed that MTV wasn't long for this world, but luckily, hope was on the horizon. MTV was about to come into focus. When MTV arrived on the scene in 1981, the channel focused mainly on rock bands, most of which were predominantly white. But then, in 1983, MTV premiered Michael Jackson's groundbreaking short film-style videos for Thriller and Beat It, and Michael and MTV became icons of the airwaves. Millions of people bought records because of the music videos, and as of 2022, the Thriller album by Michael Jackson is still one of the best-selling albums of all time. Michael and other black artists like Prince, Rick James, and Run DMC proved that MTV was ethnically diverse and could speak to multiple races and ethnicities. To bring in viewers, popular artists appeared in I Want My MTV commercials demanding their favorite music channel. MTV had clout in the industry now, and they expanded their video catalog to include more artists and genres, including R&B and disco. Other than Michael Jackson and all of the artists we've previously discussed, other huge stars like Madonna, Cyndi Lauper, The Police, Mick Jagger, Culture Club and Boy George, and Guns N' Roses appeared in commercials, screaming for their favorite music channel. MTV was gaining viewers every day, and the videos were changing and influencing culture and trends. 80s girls decked themselves out in bangles and scarves to look like Madonna and Cyndi Lauper, and guys wanted to rock like Aerosmith and Motley Crue. Record stores saw a huge rise in sales due to people who bought albums to listen to the music they heard on MTV. MTV also became a hotspot for new and upcoming talent, who otherwise wouldn't have been discovered. MTV soon became one of the few cable channels that actually turned a profit. Top brands paid for advertising on the network, and bands and artists couldn't wait to premiere their new music on MTV. Then, in 1985, MTV was purchased by Viacom Inc., and that's when things started to change. From then on, MTV continually introduced American audiences to a variety of genres and artists, including new wave, soft rock, and heavy metal. The most popular groups and singers included the likes of Adam Ant, Bryan Adams, Pat Benatar, Blondie, The Cars, and Duran Duran. The Dire Straits song Money for Nothing featured I Want My MTV in its lyrics. MTV introduced us all to music from new wavers like Duran Duran and Peter Gabriel. Catchy, if not somewhat cheesy tunes from Hall & Oates, hair bands like Poison and Van Halen, and classic rockers like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and U2. These groups provided the soundtrack to my childhood, and anytime I hear one of their songs, it takes me back to a simpler time. Who's your favorite band or singer from this era? Let us know in the comments section. MTV eventually had such a massive library that by 1984, they created different playlists that rotated throughout the week. The categories were New, Light, Breakout, Medium, Active, Heavy, and Power. All music got the exposure and airplay that it deserved, and there was something for everyone. MTV also introduced the world to the genius that is Weird Al Yankovic, and his hilarious parodies of hit songs like a Surgeon, Fat, Eat It, and She Drives Like Crazy. For those of you who watched MTV back in the day, what was your favorite MTV playlist? The first MTV Video Music Awards were held in 1984 and featured Madonna's iconic, and at the time highly controversial performance of her single Like a Virgin, during which she wore a white wedding dress and rolled around on the stage. The VMA trophy was the MTV Moon Man, and to this day, the VMAs are MTV's most watched event. In 1986, MTV started their annual coverage of spring break in Daytona Beach, Florida, and this special coverage expanded to include summer vacation, and they even broadcast live from the Action Park theme park in New Jersey. This opened the doors for future reality shows like Motel California, Isle of MTV, and SoCal Summer. Videos were separated by genre and had their own programming block. Headbangers Ball was for the heavy metal rockers out there, Yo MTV Raps was for rap and hip-hop, and 120 Minutes aired alternative rock videos. These segments were extremely successful and helped new and upcoming artists find a target audience. By 1987, MTV had pioneered what would one day be referred to as reality TV, with the premieres of MTV News, Remote Control, House of Style, and Club MTV. The channel was also now synonymous with pop culture news, dance, fashion and style, and fun. Viacom aggressively took over every aspect of MTV in the 80s, and Robert Pittman was pushed aside by the end of the decade. MTV kept expanding to include more award shows like the MTV Movie Awards and the Europe Music Awards. The videos were also being moved to make room for live event coverage and game shows. MTV once seemed unstoppable, but as usual, things were about to change. The 90s were right around the corner. When the 90s arrived, artists like Madonna and Aerosmith were able to take their popularity into the new decade, but not everyone was so lucky. Alternative artists like Sinead O'Connor and Sonic Youth were all the rage. Tastes and the music were changing, and so were the kinds of shows that brought in the most viewers. In 1992, MTV launched one of the very first reality shows, Real World. A group of strangers were forced to live with each other and have every moment of their lives together taped. Audiences loved the new format, and they identified with the realistic depictions of sexuality, drugs, mental illness, and partying. Soon, Road Rules appeared, and also involved a group of strangers, but this time, they were stripped of all their money and forced to travel across America in an RV. Road Rules contestants were given clues and missions to complete, and there was always plenty of drama. MTV News was also popular, and young people got their headlines from legendary MTV reporters Kurt Loder, Tabitha Soren, Kennedy, and Downtown Julie Brown. MTV News became famous for their Choose or Lose campaign during the presidential election of 1992, and was a huge factor in members of the Gen X generation getting politically active and socially conscious, and who campaigned and voted for Bill Clinton. MTV News broke in when Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of Nirvana, passed away in 1994, and later, several Democratic candidates appeared on MTV News to discuss important events and issues. It seemed like MTV was cool again. The 90s also introduced us to the new alternative rock genre, which was popularized by groups like Pearl Jam, Nirvana, and Alice in Chains. Heavy metal videos from Pantera and White Zombie were big hits, and gangsta rap from Snoop Dogg, Tupac, and Biggie Smalls expanded outside of the inner cities into the mainstream. MTV also featured a healthy dose of pop from divas like Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston. The live concert series MTV Unplugged was huge and featured an iconic set by Nirvana. The album of the concert, MTV Unplugged in New York, sold 5 million copies and won a Grammy Award. Mariah's MTV Unplugged EP was also a big seller. These videos and concerts became events, and artists tried to outdo one another. But in reality, the MTV of the 90s really wasn't about the music. Some people said that MTV was really starting to suck. MTV was also accused of editing and censoring videos in order to remove references to drugs, sex, violence, racism, homophobia, and even advertising. A lot of videos were only shown in the late-night hours, and some were banned entirely from the network. The Parents Music Resource Center, or PMRC, forced MTV to get rid of references to Satanism or anti-religious themes, and these bans continued all the way into the 2000s. More recently, MTV has initiated a controversial no appropriation policy that prevents the inappropriate or racist adoption of culture and other elements of other cultures and identities. This has included the case of white MTV star Scout Durwood being forbidden from wearing her hair in dreadlocks. Just when things were looking bad, MTV got into the animation game with the premiere of Mike Judge's Beavis and Butthead. Beavis and Butthead made their television debut on MTV on March 8, 1993. While the show was no stranger to controversy at the time, Mike moved his Bad Boys to a later time slot, removed the usages of words like fire, and toned down, just a bit, Beavis's penchant for being a pyromaniac and Butthead's habit of beating the bejesus out of Beavis. This didn't change how people felt about these juvenile delinquents, and critics at the time loved Beavis and Butthead for its scathing commentaries on society, music video critiques, and shockingly accurate portrayal of the Gen X generation. Beavis and Butthead's classmate, Daria Morgendorffer, was given her own show and 2 movies, which ran from 1997 to 2001. Beavis and Butthead spawned a hit movie in 1996, and its sequel, Beavis and Butthead Do the Universe, premiered on Paramount Plus this summer. The series has been rebooted twice and is still hilarious. I would love to see Daria get a reboot. How about you guys? Do you think Intellectual Digest should do more MTV or Mike Judge-related videos? Let us know what you think. By 1996, MTV had started to get so far away from actual music videos and shows that MTV2 was established. MTV2 mimicked the glory days of its big brother and featured genre-specific video blocks. Unfortunately, MTV2 would eventually yield to peer pressure and cater to reality shows and celebrity gossip and news. 1996 was a massive year of transition for MTV and the music scene in general. That year, the teen pop craze of the late 90s and 2000s was in full swing. From 1996 to 1999, the Spice Girls came over from England, and Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Backstreet Boys, and NSYNC took over the MTV studios in Times Square in New York City. Their video premieres were chaotic spectacles when they aired on the new countdown show Total Request Live, which would soon become known as simply TRL. The host of TRL was Carson Daly. TRL was one of the several MTV shows that were filmed in front of a live audience. These other shows included Say What Karaoke, which was hosted by Dave Holmes and filmed in Las Vegas, and Making the Video, which showed audiences how their favorite videos were made. Eminem and Limp Bizkit took over MTV and paved the way for other white rappers, and VJ for a Day was a contest where a lucky winner got to host live MTV shows for a day. MTV tried to get back on track with Return of the Rock, which did help to jumpstart the careers of Linkin Park, Sum 41, Jimmy Eat World, and several other modern rock bands. However, critics continued to state, rock is dead. The sentiment was the same for MTV as a whole. From roughly 1998 through the end of the 2000s, pop music took over, and anything that was sugar-coated and mass-produced outsold the harder stuff. Music streaming services also came into vogue. Napster gave way to iTunes, and the advent of YouTube changed the way people watched their favorite music videos. MTV was seen as the channel for tweens and teens. It was cheesy, and controversial moments like Kanye West's interruption of Taylor Swift's acceptance speech at the 2009 VMAs ended the decade on a very bad note. TRL started to go downhill, along with the rest of the channel, when Carson and the other VJs got into the business of delving into the private lives of celebrities, which turned MTV into a network for talk and tabloid shows, as opposed to shows about music. The Video Music Awards still brought in viewers, though, thanks to racy performances and crazy outfits. But alas, MTV made people ask the questions, is MTV still cool? And, were music videos really about music? The answers were a resounding no. By 2008, iTunes had replaced the sale of hard copy CDs, and YouTube was unstoppable. MTV canceled TRL and was virtually unrecognizable from what it once was. The next few years saw the rise of more reality shows like My Super Sweet 16, Pimp My Ride, 16 and Pregnant, Teen Mom, and Jersey Shore, and Jessica and Ashley Simpson aired their dirty laundry for all to see. These shows were successful because they definitely weren't about music. In 2011, the first Beavis and Butthead reboot flopped, and only lasted one season. The adventures of spoiled or repugnant 16-year-olds were suddenly being glamorized, and Snooki and JWoww were breakout stars. The music was over. In the last 15 years or so, MTV has been nowhere near what it was in the 80s and 90s. These days, the once great network basically consists of ridiculousness marathons, which is just, well, ridiculous. MTV's time seems to be up. As far as a music channel, MTV gave up on that in the 2000s. Even Lady Gaga and Miley Cyrus couldn't save the situation. By 2010, MTV couldn't keep up with the times. That year, the channel removed music television from its logo. Now, MTV just seems depressing and desperate. Do you think it can ever come back from the dead? On that final note, that'll be all for today's video. Do you still watch MTV, or have you moved on? I always look forward to your feedback. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and tell everyone about us. Of course, if you have any suggestions for topics, we're taking requests. I'll see you all next time on another edition of Intellectual Digest. Have an intellectual, relevant day.